everyone, and welcome back to Coding Challenge number 4 with the C2 Pipeline Innovation and Curiosity Center. I'm Mikayla, and this week we'll be working a little bit more with C++ to create a game that you guys can all play. So without any further ado, here's Coding Challenge prompt number 4. Alright, so Coding Challenge number 4 is asking us to create a tic-tac-toe game by writing user-defined functions, which is something we haven't worked with yet, so don't be worried, to set the board to empty, make a move, and check for a winner using logic. So there are 3 functions right there, and the function should work with a 3x3 array and include for loops. Well, a 3x3 array we haven't really worked with, but they're really simple to use, and for loops, they're the most simple kind of loop, so don't be worried there. So we can go ahead and get started. Okay, so what I've done is I've gone to Online GDB compiler. So remember, you're using C++ compiler, and this is a compiler that we've been using for the past 3 or 4 videos. So it works out pretty well. The first thing that you want to do once you get to the compiler is replace your header. Remember, a header is a block of comments. Comments are written in C++ by 2 backslashes. And it just tells a little bit about what the program's going to do and maybe the date that it was written and all this kind of stuff. So now that you got that out of the way, we have to include some libraries. So the different libraries that you need to include are right here. Now you can see I've commented next to them. You don't have to put these comments in your program, but just for future reference it might help. And that being said, you can go ahead and pause here and copy down all these libraries and finish your header up, and then we'll get started with the actual coding. Alright, so now that we have all of those included in the program, we can move on to our first task, which is creating our first user-defined function. So our first user-defined function is going to be setting the board to empty. Remember that this is what a tic-tac-toe board looks like. So for right now, I have these numbers up here. Those are going to be for the array. So we have to make sure that our function can take an array in as a parameter, right? Because the board is going to be an array. So you might not know what an array is. Alright, so let's talk about what an array is. An array is kind of like a storage device for a bunch of same variable types. So if you have an integer array, it holds numbers, and if you have a double array, it holds numbers with decimals, etc. This week we're going to be working with a char or string array because we're going to be putting X or O into the arrays. Well, a single array kind of looks like this. So if we have an array of size 5, here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is an integer, we can call it an integer array of size 5. Actually, this would be, if we're writing it in syntax, it would be this. If we have this integer array of size 5, then we can have any numbers in here that you want to, and it just fills those storage spots. So that's included in the same spot in memory. And of course, when we're talking about arrays, you would think that this is row or column number 1 and this is row 1. Well, actually it's not. So let's forget that. In the computer science world, this starts at 0. All arrays start at 0. So keep that in mind because we'll need that for later on in the program. So if that's 0, this is 1, 2, 3, 4. But keep in mind, this is still an array of size 5. So the size of an array is always n. So n is number of elements in an array minus 1, because we start at 0, right? So even if I have an array of size, let's say 94, the size of the array is going to be 93. So now that we got that out of the way, we can think about our tic-tac-toe board, right? So if I transform this into an array, let's say, so here's an array, and here's another array, and here's another array. and we split it up into its respected elements, we actually have one array of 3 and another array of 3 and another array of 3. So what this is called is a two-dimensional array, and you can really just create like this matrix out of it, or you kind of see it developing here. So in order to create a two-dimensional array, and again, you would use integer array, and this is the name of the array, so it can be anything, and it would be 3 and then 3. So we'll need this to go into our first user-defined function, which we'll code right now. So now we know a little bit more about arrays and what these numbers mean. We have to create our first user-defined function. So there's two types of functions. You can have a value returning function, and you can have a function that just manipulates something and then changes it in memory or cout something to a computer. Now we're going to want the second one because we're not actually returning something on our first function. So our first function is going to be a void function. And then we have to come up with a name for the function. I recommend using generic names just so it's easier to call them later on. So I'm going to call this one set to empty. And because we need it to take in a character array, and remember we decided in that last portion that the array needs to be 3 by 3, we need to declare character first. So character is used by char, and then we need to name the array. So I'm just going to call it array 1, or it doesn't even have to be array 1, it can just be an array. And then we need to make it 3 by 3, and notice that we're using a different type of bracket than we've used before. Following right after your function declaration, there needs to be curly braces just to keep everything enclosed. Same with why we have these braces in main. So now that we have that taken care of, we can go ahead and start to think about how we're going to set every single space in this table to empty. So in order to make it faster, instead of going into every single one and setting it to empty, we can actually use nested for loops. So a for loop is going to loop through each one of the rows, and then we're going to have it loop through each one of the columns. So in order to do this, a for loop needs an initialization. So we have an integer here, integer I equals 0. So this is going to be an indexing variable. And so what that's going to do is it's going to keep track. So if it's at 0 and then it moves on to 1, and it's going to increment every time it loops through. So we have I is equal to 0, and then we move on, and then we have we want a condition. So a condition is going to be if I is going to go until I is no bigger than 3. So if it gets bigger than 3, then we're going to have an issue. So make sure that your signs are going the right way, because we don't want it to loop until it's bigger than 3, because our array is only of size 3. So since we have that, we can move on. So we have an initialization, a condition. Now we need to update the array. So every time it loops, it needs to do something. So we're going to index this I by 1. So if it's at 0 to start out, it'll go to 1, and then it'll go to 2, and then continue on. So following our for loop, we have another set of curly braces, and inside those curly braces we have another one. So if this one's for the rows, then the inside one needs to be for the columns. So we're going to have something similar. So we're going to have the for again, and then we'll have a different integer to index, and then we'll loop until j this time, because our indexing variable is j. J is no bigger than 3. And then we'll index j by 1. So that should take us through the rows and the columns at the same time. And now we need to do something. So inside the array, or inside the for loop, we need to actually do something. We need to update something. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our array. Remember, our name of our array up here is ARR. And we're going to say at index I, j, we want to set the space, the character, to a blank space. So this is going to automatically do that, but we want to make sure that it's actually working. So what I've done here is I've taken the array and I've gone at each individual spot and I've set it equal, or I've called that array spot. So what that's going to do is it's going to print out the character at that specific spot. I've also included the spaces in between here so that it'll look like a table. So now when we scroll down, you can see I've typed the name of the function in order to call the array, and I've put the array that I've declared up here. So you'll need a character array of size 3 by 3. So go ahead and declare that. Then call your function array down here and put that in there. So when you run the function, let's see, we have an error. So let's see, set to empty, character 3 and line 34. Oh, semicolon, don't forget there's semicolons. So let's see, array at ij equals blank spot. Oh, and of course this is single quotation marks because we're working with characters. So there, now we should be able to run it. And so when you run it, it'll print your empty table. Now remember that it's a good idea to try your functions as soon as you write them, because you can pick out errors. So if we were to write that whole code and then had to go back, it might be a little confusing. So it's a good thing that we ran into an error there, because that's always a good point. Run your code as much as possible while you're coding, so you can debug as you go. So go ahead and write this out, and then we'll come back for step number 2. Okay, so now we have to work on our second user-defined function. So second user-defined function. And this one again is going to be a void function. So what this function is going to do is it's going to allow the players to make moves. So let's just call this function making moves, again with the standard names so that we can keep track of them later on. And again, this is going to take in a character array, and I'll tell you why. It's because we're going to have, this is where the user is going to input the spot in the table that they want to put their X or O. So if they want to put it in the very top left hand corner, it's going to be spot 0, 0, and if they want to put it in the bottom corner, it's going to be 2, 2. So since we have that, and remember that the array needs to be a size 3, we have our function declared. So now what we can go ahead and do, and this one's going to kind of be a long one, is we need to come up with an integer for a row and then an integer for a column. And this will allow the user to input a row number and then a column number, and then we can put it into the array to put an X or an O there. So now that that's done, we have to also have a character variable named, I'm just going to call it mover. So we'll talk about this variable later on. So the first thing we have to do is we have to prompt the user first to enter a row and a column. So let's remember how we did that last week. So see out your message, row, and then we have an line, and then cn, and then we're going to read into the row variable, and then we have cout. Please enter a column. Now you might see a problem with this right off the bat is, what if the user enters a row or column that is not in the range? So we need to catch for those errors. So inside, like right above here, so we have our if statement, remember that from the last week. So here's our row, and then we have if, let's say, row is any bigger than 2, or any bigger than 2, or remember the sign for or the row is not greater than 0, then we need to see out a message to the user saying error, 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 and then reprompt them again for the question. So we can actually just copy and paste this right there. So now that that's caught, we can do the same thing for the column. So we can actually just copy and paste this right below it, and instead of row, we're just gonna write column, and then column, and then column again here, and then column. So now all of our things have been accounted for. We can actually move on to, so we have two if statements, now we need an else statement. So that else statement is going to be if they entered it completely correct. So C out, and then we have row entered correctly, and then we can move on to the next thing. So now that we have the entered correctly and everything what place they have been chosen, we can ask them to choose an X or an O. Please choose an X or an O. So now that we have the X and the O chose, we need to read that into a variable. So let's read it into our mover variable, right? Because we have our mover variable as a char. So now that we have that done, they've chosen X or O and they've chosen the spot they want to put it into. Now we just need to print the table again. So we can scroll back up to our original function up here. Remember our first function we ever created, and we can go up here and we can copy and paste that table. And so what this function does, once we have that table, we need to then take what they put into the thing. So array2, which is, remember what we declared up here, array2. Now we need to take that modified, that row in the column, and then put that mover variable in there. So we have our row here. Remember, that's a number between 0 and 2, and then we have our column, another number between 0 and 2 that the user entered, and then we have equals, and then we can have our mover variable. So what this is doing is we're asking the user to please enter a row, so it would be, remember a row up here, so it would be 0, 1, or 2, and then we're asking them to enter a column. And then once they enter the row and column, we're checking to make sure that it's no greater than 2 and it's no less than 0 in both cases. And then our else, so if it is, then that means they've entered it correctly. They're choosing an X or an O, so they're choosing what kind of variable they want to put into the table. And then we're taking, behind the scenes, we're taking that row they entered, we're taking that column they entered, and putting that mover variable that they also entered, an X or an O, into the array. So when we run this, first we're going to call the set to empty like we did before, and then we can call the making moves function, and then we can actually call array1. Remember, because that's going to be our 3x3 array. So when we run this, we get an error. Let's see. We have an error in 86. So, oh, yeah, of course. This needs to be array2. So we can copy and paste all of this. And that's another thing. So when you're copying and pasting, you need to be careful, of course, with your naming conventions, because as you see, it'll throw an error. And then we have a error here. So we have in line 69, which is right there, we forgot a semicolon. So no big deal. Let's just run it again. And when it finally compiles, you should enter a row. So if I put 1, 1, enter a column, so put 1, and I'll put an X there. Oh, well, I put 1 again, but you can see it'll print that character in this very spot. So that's good because this is spot 1, 1. So now we know that that function's working, we can move on to our next function. Alright, so our final user-defined function that we have to define is going to be one that checks for a winner. So we're going to actually introduce a new variable type that we haven't really talked about before, but it's a Boolean data type. And so what a Boolean data type does is it either returns true or false. So in this case, like if if the Boolean data type returns as a 1, which is true, then we have a winner, but if it returns as false, then we don't have a winner. So in order to talk about this function, we first need to write the function calling. So we have the name of the function, or the data type of the function, of course, and then we have the name of the function, so I'm just going to do check for winner. And then we have our parameters again, which is going to be a character, and then we have array. Let's just call it 3 because this is our third function. And remember, it's a 3 by 3 two-dimensional array. So now that we have that declared, we need to go through and create every single instance where somebody could win. So first, let's think about, we have all the instances where it would be across rows. So let's say across rows, and then we have across column or down columns. So if you're looking at it, it would be like O, 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 or X, X, X. That would be across a row, and then down a column would look like 1, 1, or let's just say X, 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 X. So we have to think of that, and then we also have the diagonals we have to think about too. So the diagonals would be like X, and then X, and then X again. And then of course we have this way as well. So we need to think about both those instances, and then for every one of these instances we have it both for X and O. So we have to think about all those things when coding this next part. So I'm going to write 2 or 3 of these, and then I'm going to leave it up to you to write the rest. And then of course, if you need a little bit extra help, the full CPP is on the C2 Pipeline website, so feel free to visit that at any point during this thing. So the first one we have to think about is, I'm going to write one of the diagonal ones. So if we have if, let's say, array at, remember array 3 at 0, 0, so now we're in the top corner. 0, 0 equals, and let's just say capital X. And so for this condition to be true, all 3 of these things have to be met. So array 3 at that middle one's going to be 1, and then 1 equals a capital X. And then we have our final condition for this. And array 3 at 2, 2 equals, sorry, these should all be double equal signs, my fault. These should be double equal signs, so equals another capital X. Then, remember parentheses, then C out, we know that X is the winner, and we're returning, so because this is a bool function, unlike this function, we need to have return statements. We're returning a 1. So this is going to be our X diagonal from the top, let's see, this would be the top left hand corner down. So now we have to write the same exact thing for zeros, so we can actually just copy this, and instead of an if statement, it's going to be an else if. So else if, and then we have, instead of x's, we have o's, not a 0, an o. So we just change this and this. So of course, now we have both of the ones that look like going down this way from that top corner. And you'll go through this for the whole entire thing. So if you were to do a row, here we go, it would look like else if, and you can actually go ahead and just copy this whole thing because we're going to be modifying this pretty much just the values in here. So if we're at 0, 0, then we need to go to 0, 1, and then 0, 2, and so that takes us right across the front row, or the top row, And then we just need to return x is the winner and then return 1. So you need to do this for every instance. So we're going to pause here and you can go through them all. Okay, so now you should have gone through all of them, and I've kind of changed the order of mine just a little bit so that they're all in order. So it starts with diagonals up here and then it goes to rows and then it goes to columns, and you can see that I've written every instance above each one of the else if statements, and it's a pretty long function, so don't be worried. Now remember, at the end of your function it should be an else statement, so if you're throwing errors, make sure you have the else statement, and there should be no winner. So every single time this program is run, or every single time an input is entered, it's going to check and see if there's a winner. So there should be that else statement, because if you only have 2 X's and 2 O's in the table, then that means that there's no winner, right? And we want the program to catch that. So now when we scroll down to main, we have to look at some different things, and we can actually call this function. So we can call the check for winner function, and then we can put our array that we already have manipulated in here, array 1, and we can run this and see if it'll compile correctly, which is something you should be doing, remember, throughout your program, just to make sure that everything's working the way you want it to. So we can enter row 1 and then enter column 1, and we can put an X in there. And once we put that X, we should get this. So because there's only one thing, we have no winner yet, and so it's checking that. So now that we have this confirmation that that function's working, we actually have to work on main, because we don't want to keep calling these over and over and over again, because we don't know really how many moves that they're going to be. So we need to work on putting a for loop in. So that's going to be our next step. So we've already worked to create our variable array, or our character array here. So we have that already set up. The next thing we want to do is we want to, of course, make sure the table is set to empty. So that's going to be our number 1 priority starting off. So set table to empty, and we've actually already done this, and then we want this to be outside of that initial loop, right? Because every time it loops, we don't want to keep setting the table to empty. So once the table is set to empty, maybe we want to see out a message that just says table is empty, just so that the user knows that that function is working, or not empty. So now that we have that done, we can actually start to think about our loop. So if we need a loop until it's greater than or less than or equal to 3, right? Because we know that if there's more than 3 turns that each person has gone through, it's going to result in a tie, right? Because there's only that many spaces in the array. So in order to get the loop set up, we have to do for, and then we have our initialization. So let's go k, because we already used I and j up there. So integer k equals 0. So we're starting at the indexing variable at 0, and we're going to go until k is equal to 3 or less than 3, and there's an actual winner. And then we're going to increment k by 1. So remember that this needs to be in parentheses, so we have that there, and I'm going to get rid of these for right now. So since we have that, I'm just going to see out an end line first, because up here it's going to print that, it's going to print stuff from our previous function. So since we have that C out there, now we can send a message to say player 1, it is your turn. So that just lets player 1 know that it's their turn to enter data. So since we have that entered, we can go ahead and call that making moves function. So making moves, and then we can call it on our function that we defined up here, or not our function, sorry, our array we defined up here. So we have array 1. And then so since we called it on that array 1, that's going to call that function, and we need a semicolon after that. And then just for format and how I like the output to be, I'm going to put an end line right there, and you don't have to do that. And I encourage you to play around with it, because you can make your main as interactive as you want, or as visually appeasing as you want. Whatever you want to do is really fine. It's all up to you. So since we have that done, we need to then check if there's a winner after they enter their variable, right? So if check for winner, and we're going to use our array 1 because we have a 3x3 array that we've entered there. If check for winner at array 1 equals 1, we know that there is a winner, so we have to break because it just returned true. So since we have that, that'll break us out of the loop. If then we have to so if there's a winner at that point, it breaks. So then we have to ask the player 2 to go. So we can just copy and paste from up here, and we can paste it right there. So player 2, it's your turn. So since we have player 2's turn in here, we need to then have them enter their information. So we can go ahead and call that making moves function again on that same table, so array 1, and don't forget the semicolon, of course, and then we need our cout just to match the other one in line. So now that we have that second making moves function, we need to check again to see if there was a winner, and if there was a winner, then we need to break in the function, but if not, then we can continue looping. So if there was a winner, and this means, so at this point, if there wasn't a winner, then we need to print out that there was a tie, because there's not really a clear, if there's no winner, then that means there's no loser either, so that means there's a tie. There was a tie, and remember, this is going outside the loop, because if we put it inside the loop, it'll print over and over again. So there was a tie, and then we can just show application end if you want to, or just send a message to the user that says program over. So it's totally up to you, but other than that, we can go ahead and run the program. So we run it, and we got please enter a row, so I'm going to put 1 followed by an enter. Please enter a column, I'm going to put 1 and enter. Enter correctly, so that's a good sign. Now we have it X. Now this is being really slow. Okay, cool. So we've printed in the correct position. There's no winner yet, and now it's telling us player 2, it's your turn. So now it's player 2's turn. So let's just say they enter 2, and then followed by an enter. And then they enter 2 again, so that'll put us in the bottom corner. And then we put an O there. So there's no winner yet, but we see that our O was put into the table. So our tic-tac-toe is up and functioning, so that's a good sign. So that brings us to the end of coding challenge number 4. As always, if you need a little bit extra help, you can visit the STEM Labs website for more information and the full code written out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next week.